Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region. My name is Brandon, and welcome to this Free State Colorado interview. The mission of Free State Colorado is to promote a culture of liberty, freedom of the individual, and a free market. Today, I'm joined by one of Colorado's premier liberty leaders, Natalie Menten. Natalie's political experience includes spending 8 years on the RTD board, spearheading the repeal of the grocery tax in Lakewood, and is one of the state's strongest defenders of Tabor, serving on the board of the Tabor Foundation and Tabor Committee. Natalie is an expert at deciphering ballot language, and today she's going to share information on some of this year's ballot initiatives. Well, Natalie, I hope you are well, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, Natalie, let's start with Jefferson County. What can you get? Can you give us some insight about the ballot initiatives in Jefferson County this year?
Sure. To start with, I'm Natalie Menten, and longtime involvement with ballot issues, especially protecting our taxpayers' Bill of Rights, which just want to let everybody know it's going to be the 30th anniversary of Tabor. It was approved 30 years ago, 1992, and so it's been serving Colorado for a very long time. Most people that have been here a while are aware that there have been attacks on Tabor for a long time, year after year after year, whether it's local level or state level, because Tabor covers both of all the levels of government in Colorado. And it's good to know there's a lot of different governments. People think about the state, but then we have local issues like county issues. And we can go into a little more depth on that because we've got that going on in Jeffco. But I do want to start at the beginning that I've done an enormous amount of research on local issues this year. And even if somebody's watching and they don't live in Jeffco, then go visit a website I put together called ballot2022.com. And at ballot2022.com, there is a downloadable PDF that lists let's put it this way, a lot of research on local governments, and it boils down the local ballot issues, and it's sorted by counties. So somebody can go to that website, go to the PDF, it's a viewable one, or download it, go down to the county that you live in, and you could potentially see a very similar issue to what I'm going to talk about more in depth here that we have going on in Jeffco. And it has to really boil down to about property taxes. And somebody says, well, I don't own property. Well, actually, the reality is, because of government, who really does own property? Because you pay property taxes. And if you're a landlord or own a rental property, you end up paying property taxes, and those are a cost involved with that business action of renting out property. So what you end up doing is passing it on down to the renter. So that's why it applies to every person who's watching this video. So in Jefferson County, we've got 3 issues going on. And as a history here, we had an election in 2019 where we beat this tax increase back by a good sizable number. And the voters spoke at that time, but it didn't stop the county there. So they've been working since 2019 to put something on the ballot again, and they have come forward with these issues. There are 3 of them in Jefferson County. The first is issue 1A. And at the county level, how the ballot question is framed is really put together by staff and lawyers, and is approved by the county commissioners. That's a little bit of a different process than how statewide questions may be framed. And that means that your elected officials can use liberty, meaning in a bad way, to frame the question in a way that suits them best, but is not exactly the most accurate thing. So here's a good way that I reflected it, and I'm not sure how this is going to show up. I don't know how that'll see. Warning, and this is a trifold flyer that we created that basically it says, warning, your 2022 ballot includes misleading ballot questions that will eliminate your Tabor refunds forever. That's the cover of it because that's what sums it up. In the Jeffco case, which can be found again in counties through the state, because those elected officials might create their own questions. Some of them may do better job than others, but in Jeffco, they were used to have a very misleading start in what the discussion should be about. Jefferson County ballot, she says that provided no local tax rate or mill levy shall be increased without voter approval, shall Jefferson County be able to exclude certain funds from certain funds, revenues, meaning tax dollars, from the revenues that are covered under the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights government revenue limit. Now, what does that all mean? It comes down to this. They're talking about taxpayers are going to get refunds from Tabor. It's one of the beautiful things about the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. And the government's saying, can we exclude certain revenues from that cap? So here's the amount of money the government's taking in. And Tabor says government can grow by a reasonable amount, meaning government can collect revenues by a reasonable amount. But when they over collect, that money gets refunded to the taxpayers. Sometimes that's an obvious, and I'm going to use it interchangeably, but try to stick with rebate because it's more accurately a rebate, the Tabor rebate. And that would be because a refund, you get all of it back. A rebate, you're just getting a portion of it back. So with this rebate that we get, sometimes it's very obvious. Like many people think of the $750 check that we got back from the state of Colorado. But also there's other mechanisms that are going on that sometimes are not so obvious about how we're benefiting from the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. Those are, moving on up from that check that came in the mail, is there's also a temporary income tax rate reduction. There's the homestead and senior the senior homestead and disabled veteran property tax exemption is also funded under Tabor rebates. But going back to the county level, the way it works there is that because the big identifiable part of the revenue coming in is attributable to property taxes. So the efficient way when you have a Tabor rebate in a county is to do a direct rebate on the property taxes. It's a green way to do it if you want to think of it that way. You don't have to send out checks. It's going to apply to the person who's paid the property taxes. Well, what Jefferson County is, first of all, going back to asking is, can we exclude a part of the revenue that counts and would go towards that general fund, let's call it, take that out, and therefore the amount that's going to apply and be capped by Tabor is reduced by whatever that amount is. Now, they've made it sound like they're removing a small part from that cap. But what is the fact is that it's stating it'll be everything except non-property tax revenues. So what does that mean? And they use examples such as state grants. Well, they did that purposely because they don't want to talk about all the other taxes they get, from gaming taxes to think about your car registration and that long list that's on the back. You want to talk about tobacco taxes. There are investments. There's a long list of revenues that they are excluding from that cap. And the reality is, just to sum that down real quickly, is they want to exclude over 60% of the taxes that they collect at the county level from Tabor. It means it's taking it out over here. What that means then is that as they put it, the property tax is still the part under Tabor. But now property taxes can grow and grow and grow and grow to get to that cap because all of that 60% plus has been taken out. But they like to frame it that it's just state grants. Of course, they use an example of wildfire state grant or The most, let's say I'm trying to think of the most, they don't have a lot of examples actually. And when I've asked them repeatedly, give me the numbers on this, the answer is they don't know. So what does this all mean? It means that because all of that big chunk of revenue's now been taken out, the property taxes can grow. And Tabor really is, when would we ever get a rebate back from Jefferson County in the future? I think it'll be a long time. The other part that is I'm going to bring up, and this gets into the weeds a little bit, and especially applies across the state for people who have those local issues like this, is that when you read the ballot language, it talks about notwithstanding the limitations of Article X, Section 20. Well, first of all, what is that? That's a taxpayer's Bill of Rights. It's been the voters, citizens, hundreds of citizens circulated petition signatures. The voters approved Tabor through that process, put on the ballot that was approved 30 years ago. That's removing that section. That's what Article X, Section 20 of the Colorado Constitution is. But what you should note also is then it will almost always say on your ballot or any other law. So what is that? Are you going to go dig through all the statutes to figure out that? No, because we're going to find out right here. What that is a law that was put in place and applied in 1989, so before Tabor. And what this law is called is the 5.5% property tax revenue limit. And if you want to look it up in CRS, it's 29-1-301. If I was looking over here, it's because I'm referencing the computer screen. But what a question like we've got in Jeffco is saying is, not only are we essentially removing the Tabor limits off this big chunk of money, and we're talking, I did a rough estimate because the county commissioners, at least Tracy Kraft Tharp, would not answer me. Staff won't answer me. I did that through a Quora. I said, what's the dollar amount? So I did a rough number off they call it the CAFR. It's a comprehensive annual financial report. It's the report of all the spending. And I think we're talking to the tune of $50 million that is going to be removed from Tabor because of this ballot issue. And the ballot issue is 1A. By the way, I think I may have said it early on, but I'll say it again. So this is Jefferson County ballot issue 1A. Now, I'm going to go back to being able to, and I'm just, sorry, getting to my desktop other one here, but again, going to ballot2022.com. If people go there and they look up, so again, ballot2022.com, Tabor notice and local list, they'll find I forget what it was, pretty compact spreadsheet still at 11 pages of all the local elections around Colorado. And I'm going to say a fair chunk of them are pretty much the story I just described, where people are trying to be told it might be a minor amount of money, we're going to de-Tabor, do this, or maybe de-Tabor the whole thing. But the reality is you're giving away your rebates forever, and Tabor never meant to do that. There's supposed to be a 4-year limit, so the voters can review it later, and these are permanent actions. So I'm going to hold for 1 minute there and see if you've got any questions about that.
Wow. Yeah, very frightening. This idea that it's not new. It's been going on a long time, like you said, where they know they can't repeal Tabor at the state level, but all the different counties, municipalities are trying to chip away at it to de-Tabor their local communities so they can keep more of our tax money. But I think it's really important for people to realize that it's their tax refund. It means your tax refund is going to go away, and it's less money you have for your family, less money you have to pay your bills, and it's truly frightening. So you said it's about 11 pages on the website of how many different cities and municipalities are doing this or counties, I guess at the county level, this election cycle.
Well, what I focused on in the spreadsheet was the elections that were pertaining to the taxpayers' Bill of Rights. So I'll give a little background on what that took. First, I had to do in the August of this year timeframe a CORA, public information request, on the 64 counties. And there's a reason for this. So I would ask the county to tell me which political subdivisions had given notice they were reserving a place on the ballot. That's the way to get a, it's consider them, the county election department is like the warehouse. And all these local governments, and I believe we're over 4,000 local governments in Colorado now. All of these local governments would, per Colorado revised statutes, have a deadline to reserve their spot by letting the election department know, hey, we're thinking of running a ballot issue. And hopefully they tell the county, hey, it's going to be or not related to the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights or TABOR. So that's the point where I want to catch them after the deadline's passed, do the court to the county, say, give me the list of every local political subdivision that has reserved the spot, reserved the room. Following that, there's a deadline where they set and give them the actual language. Well, there was a reason to put this all together, and it was because wanted to get the word out to people. And again, I'm not sure who shows up, but this is the local ballot issue book. So a lot of voters will get a book similar to this. It might be only one sheet folded, but there are pro-con statements in these. And you have to know about the deadline to be able to fight the, in my case, tax hikes and share the word. So if people miss that deadline, then it says no submission or no statement submitted by the deadline. And so that was the whole purpose in doing this. So it meant doing the core with all these counties. Finally, they would give me the list back. Some were good and some were horrible. I give real credit to the ones that were good. Same day. I mean, they already had this stuff. It was on their desk. It was election time. It's not like they had to go in the back file cabinet somewhere. Some bought me on it. It was somewhat miserable. But then have to go to then digging into all those local governments. And some of them don't even post minutes. I mean, I'm gonna point to Highland Hills up north. It's the Park and Rec where Waterworld is. You can't even find minutes of the board meetings. So somewhere again, good. You'd find great sets of minutes. There's program where they can post these things. Anyway, the point is, I had to search up all these local ballot issues because I had to put them in the spreadsheet. So that was over 200 local governments. And then find people, hopefully, or at least get the word out that, hey, you've got a deadline to submit a con statement to fight a tax hike. Here's the process, how to do it. Here's hints, tips, da-da-da. And so that was the first result or purpose for that website. And now it serves to help just boil it down so people don't get tricked into this deceptive language and wording. Things like, we won't increase the tax rate on your property like this Jeffco 1A. Well, we won't increase the rate or we won't increase the mill levy, but what they're not telling you is, and this is the important part of this rambling perhaps, the important part to remember is when you have removed that TABOR limit and the 5.5% property tax cap, sure, the rate may not go up and the mill levy rate may not go up, but is the assessment of your property going to go up? It's very likely it is, right? So now the growth of that property value goes up. And if you've removed all that limit, doesn't matter that you didn't increase the rate or the mill levy itself. You've removed that cap that was safeguarded you for many years. In Jeffco's case with 1A, they actually want to try to tell you that only 2 counties in Colorado have the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights protections. That's not the case. We are one of 13 counties. Now, that's a pretty sad number considering we have 64 counties in Colorado. We are one of 13 in Jeffco that still has all or a majority of our taxpayers or a portion of our Taxpayers' Bill of Rights still in place. After TABOR passed and the local governments figured out they had better paid lawyers to craft things. And I think most citizens can recognize it's quite a challenge to do a legal, a lawsuit against a government that they could get away with a lot of things. In those early years after Tabor passed, a majority of the counties have slid by the voters, probably deceptively, or with language that was less than clear. Let's put it kindly, language that was very less than clear what they were having taxpayers do long ago. And this goes into a thing I want to do a video with you about later on, about how do you regain, or we could do it now maybe, how do you regain your Tabor at a county level? Well, most citizens don't know this, but you can't petition your government at a county level. You can't say, I'm going to go out and I want to put something on the ballot, and it will affect the county, like regaining the rights of taxpayers. You don't have that at the county level. So when you give away those rights, you're totally dependent now upon the elected officials. So the point I'll be, don't vote yes on 1A. You're making a permanent decision that, as I described, affects you as a renter or a property owner, whichever it may be. You're permanently removing over 60% of the revenues from the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, government revenue caps. You're giving up your refunds. That is a tax increase. If you're paying more in those property taxes, or you don't get the rebate check like Jeffco's been sending to people in a political ploy, really. They want to try to make people look like it's a pain in the rear to send these checks. They don't have to do that. They made a conscious decision to send these checks to people. They could have just done paperless right on the property taxes. For a variety of reasons, this is all the reasons, and so many more, to vote no on Jeffco 1A.
Wow. Yes, thank you for that explanation. It's fascinating, and really I appreciate the in-depth research that you've done and all the work you put into that. I know it's not easy, and thank you very much for everything you've done.
Well, hopefully, did I try to break it? I tried to break it down to, you know, but it's an intense issue. So,
Mhm.
I hope people will understand how it impacts them, even though it's worded in a really deceptive way.
Right, right. And that's a problem, I think, with a lot of our government in general and the ballot specifically. It's not always easy to tell exactly what the initiatives are going to do, especially when it's the county or state lawyers writing them and using a lot of jargon and legal jargon, political jargon that most people are not too familiar with.
Yeah.
So, so Natalie, is it fair to say then, just to clarify for people, the county commissioners in Jefferson County are pretty much are the ones responsible for getting 1A on the ballot?
Yes. That was their decision, and I'll share our chair of our county commissioners, actually, Commissioner Andy Kerr, is no fan of the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. There's been a over a decade long, right around there, legal challenge to overturn Tabor at the statewide level, and our county commissioner, in his personal role, is the lead plaintiff in that legal challenge to overturn Tabor entirely at the state level. So to see him as wanting to drive this back onto the ballot, even though we said no in 2019, not much has changed. Matter of fact, there's been shenanigans. They say they haven't got the revenue, but they got close to $200 million in federal bailout money, which they're now just starting to spend. It was their decision, yes, put it on the ballot. It was their decision to word the question the way it is, which is deceptive and sly. It was the county commissioner's decision to issue property or Tabor rebate checks last year in the amount of a few dollars to each and every taxpayer, and use taxpayer funding to spend close to, I think this round, they were close to $250,000 on the postage and stamps to mail out checks. So they've done this 2 years in a row. So last year's check was fairly small. This year's check is about 35, 40 bucks. It's proportional, well, for the average homeowner, probably proportional amount. They didn't have to spend that money on sending the checks to us. They could have again applied it on the property taxes. The only people who did get it were property tax payers. Again, that's the most identifiable portion of how you issue it in a convenient way. But they could choose other methods too. Tabor doesn't define how you issue rebates. They could have a tax holiday. They could give everybody, instead of charging us all one of those line items, the back of their car registration fee, they could knock that line out for 1 year period, whatever amount of time. They have all of these choices. They're entirely responsible for the issue. And I am sad to say that I think even if we knock down this issue, they won't be done yet. I look at a couple of issues, the other issues they've got in the ballot that I want to talk about, issue 1B and 1C. So yeah, it's all on their shoulders.
It's, yeah, like you said, it's not only important to defeat 1A this year, but also to make sure the voters are holding these commissioners accountable for trying to steal their tax refund money away from them. I think
Yes.
that's a very powerful message, and I think it could be a good message going forward for people who want to challenge them in future elections.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, let's go ahead and jump on to the next one if you'd like to.
Sure.
On either.
This one probably won't. This one won't be as much hard since we got past the Tabor discussion, and a lot of the folks reading or listening in on your show or watching, I'm sure are pretty familiar with Tabor at this point, hopefully. But the next issue is 1B and 1C. So 1A was driven by the county commissioners, but 1B and 1C is large part driven by the marijuana industry. 1B will legalize, authorize. That should be a problem in itself, right? Authorize manufacture and sales of marijuana. So what you're doing with this is you're saying, yeah, government, it's okay to regulate me and it's okay to tell me if I can open a business or not. So, just from a liberty, free state point of view, that's an issue in itself, but it goes beyond that to actual dollars with this. And what it's saying is, okay, not only authorize this manufacture and sales of marijuana in unincorporated Jeffco, because that's not present right now. So like if you want to go to Lakewood or Wheat Ridge, I think you can go to any municipality except maybe Arvada. They may be the only one that doesn't allow it. Authorize marijuana. But what it's also saying in there, because because you may put this in clips, I'm not sure or not, but the issue with Jeffco 1B is that from a liberty point of view, it's fine. You're fine with marijuana, great. But what you do in the language in there with 1B is that it is saying for all the revenue that's from this government authorization and, kind generosity to allow you to own a business, is that all of the revenue and the taxes proceeds from the manufacturer, especially manufacturing, and the sales, and I shouldn't say especially, it's both, from those are exempt from our taxpayers' Bill of Rights government revenue limits, which means any of that money that Jefferson County is bringing in, you'll never get a Tabor rebate on those funds. Now, Taxpayers' Bill of Rights talks about a 4-year limit on any delay or getting that rebate, the time out for when a government can keep the revenues without rebating it to us. It talks about a 4-year, but Jeffco 1B does it permanently. So you're giving away the rights, your rights, you're giving away your neighbor's rights, you're giving away the next generation's right, you're giving away your children's right, by giving away your Tabor rebates forever. Because at a county level, you don't have the ability to petition something as a citizen, reinstatement of, let's say, Tabor rights back in place. You're giving it away permanently with this action. The only one who can change that is the body of the 3 county commissioners. And in Jeffco, we've got a county commissioner who hates Tabor. He was, he's lead plaintiff for the legal action to try and get rid of Tabor, which the court denied last year, December, finally, after 10 years. Andy Kerr And the group that wanted to get rid of Tabor, finally said, okay, we're not going to proceed with this. But anyway, with 1B, even whether you oppose marijuana, whether you like marijuana, whichever way it may fall, when you're giving away your Tabor rebates forever, that's not a good free state action. Now, do you want where do you go from here? You say, well, I still want marijuana in Jefferson County. Well, great. Tell the county commissioners to bring it back and don't have the permanent Tabor debrucing or detaboring in there. So there are choices here. Doesn't have to be give away all your rights. It can be saying, no, we're going to send a message. And I was believed 2 years ago, defeated a Lakewood sales tax on marijuana. So it didn't stop. It just said, no, this financial action won't take place. So then moving on to 1C, that's tied to 1B only a sense. And 1B could pass in Jeffco, which is authorized sales and manufacture. But unfortunately, it have the detabor in it, where you don't get any rebates back from that revenue anymore ever. Issue 1C is authorizing sales tax. What this one is doing is tying to 1B. And again, 1B could just pass by itself. So you've got authorizing manufacturing sales, and then issue 1C, which is tying in the sales tax. It'll start at 3%, but allows up to 6% without them having to come back to you. In this same one, you're removing the Tabor limits. So if anything, it's going to definitely encourage them to jump right to that 6% as soon as they can, right? They won't tell you 3 now, but it'll jump to 6. You're removing the limits on all of that Tabor rebate also forever and permanently. So in both of those actions, again, they could come back, they could say, authorize manufacturing sales, but don't do it permanently detabor. And with the sales tax, set it at 3%, say, come back to the voters. But I don't believe in sales tax. I think sales taxes are regressive in a general theme, no matter what. And then come back and say, all of these actions, if anything, would have either no detabor at all, meaning all that revenue could still come back with rebates, or at very minimum, they got to have the 4-year, which is expressed in Tabor. And if they don't have that 4-year sunset on keeping those revenues, then it's really just a violation of the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. So for both of those, there's an option. Both of them, I think I've laid out a reason where no is a good, reasonable answer at this point in time.
Yeah, thank you for that, because the B especially can be very misleading, I think, for a lot of liberty activists or libertarians or liberty-minded individuals who want to see who don't want to see the restrictions on the ability of manufacture and sale of cannabis in unincorporated Jefferson County. But yeah, if it comes at too high a price where they're going to keep this tax money and exclude it from Tabor, yeah, it's very tricky, and it's interesting to see how tricky these county commissioners are in the county itself in terms of trying to figure out ways to keep more of our money and circumvent the state constitution.
Yes, agree. And I there's so many. I'm gonna go back. I've got a ballot, a website, ballot2022.com, and the Jeffco issue with, for instance, the marijuana. There's other counties and municipalities that are doing very similar things through the state. And if somebody goes to ballot2022.com and goes to the Tabor notice and local list, sorry, I was just referencing what I've got it titled on the website, they'll see different marijuana measures similar to this. There's different ones with lodging taxes. That's another tax that slides by. A lot of people are like, oh, it doesn't affect me, but what you're doing is detaboring measure. Another one that's I think of real threat, and this is for another show, and I don't know if I put it on the list or not. I think I had to filter through a list of local ballot issues. Is that a common theme on this year, and we'll see more of it, is governments asking voters to take on the responsibility of telecom, cable, and internet provider. And there was a change in statute, and now the municipalities can come back and ask voters. And just think about the depth of where government controlled utilities, almost like that, would go. And I don't know if you've had anybody on the show that has spoken to that, but to me, it raises a lot of concerns, and I'm seeing it here in Lakewood because I have a lot of involvement in city politics.
Yeah, that's definitely a topic that deserves a lot more detail, and it's something people need to be watching across the state, right? It's just the further Sovietizing of our state, of our communities, where the government just controls, they give you your food, they give you your housing, they give you your utilities, and as long as you follow all of their edicts, you can survive, poorly, albeit, but that's kind of where they want to go. A lot of these authoritarians who feel like they can micromanage our lives and,
Good
and create a
little,
society.
be a good little citizen.
Yeah,
Yes.
good little citizens, stay in line, don't speak out, don't go protest at a school board meeting, and don't write angry letters to the editor. Yeah, that's where it's going. If unless people stand up, unless people speak out, politics is truly a participatory sport, and it's really those who show up win.
Yeah.
Well, perfect, Natalie. What other are there any statewide issues you'd like to cover?
Yeah. I'm going to go into Proposition 123. Proposition 123 is one that I've followed since springtime. The process to get something on the ballot here in Colorado is where you start in springtime is where the proponents present their language and a ballot question is set. So that's where you first set that, and then you're able to then go into a petition process, which we're fortunate to have here in Colorado at some levels. You can't petition every government in Colorado, but with Prop 123, I became aware of that in springtime when it was going through the title board. And what it's doing is taking revenue from income taxes that goes into our state's general fund. Right now, it's this measure will take 0.1 of 1%, 1/10 of 1% of income tax coming into the general fund right now, which funds education and a variety of projects that one might normally think with of government. It also, of course, we also always have mission creep in government. One of the main things, but the general fund is the big pool of money that funds all of these different things. And Prop 123 proposes to take again that percentage, which right now is about $300 million a year, but it grows by how much income tax revenue grows. So $300 million is a forecast right now, and it can easily change. They do forecasts multiple times through the year. Could grow, could skyrocket, could become smaller. Takes that money from the regular big pool of money and it puts it into a brand new government program called the State Affordable Housing Fund. This new State Affordable Housing Fund, and I'm going to stop saying affordable right now that everybody got the gist, and it will become subsidized housing because that is the more accurate term, right? That $300 million a year is going to go into this new government-controlled, taxpayer-subsidized housing fund. That pool of money, once it made the transfer from the big pool of funds over this new one, it is now exempt from government revenue limits under our Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. So we'll never see a refund or rebate. Rebate's a better word because Tabor generates a rebate to us of money collected over a certain cap. And we allow government to grow a moderate rate, and money, when it goes beyond that, we get that rebate back. Well, when this Prop 123, the subsidized housing plan, moves that money into this new state bureaucracy, none of those funds will ever be rebated back to us as we have under Tabor. The money is then split between the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, which is a really cool government name. They shorten it to OEDIT. So it goes there, and then it probably goes to the Public Housing Authority. That's the best that the proponents can define that as, or CHAFA. The rest of the money then will go to local governments. And there'll be a lot of hurdles and problems when it goes to the local governments. I'll go into a little bit more detail there. When it goes into this funding has now been split between state government and between a local government. It's going to fund a bunch of government programs. The ones that are probably the most concerning is government land banking. So that'll be government now aggressively going into the property market and competing against mom and pop, the small family. And when you have a government with deep pockets competing against mom and pop and a small family or whoever it may be, that does not help with housing affordability. You have a new competitor in the market, and that's not a proper role for government to start with. That's one thing. It'll also offer concessionary loans. Concessionary loans mean the government is offering substandard loan terms that are below what the average person would get. But jumping to the local part, there are hurdles there also. Any local government that wants to be eligible for receiving what these funds, which were once part of our TABOR refunds. It's this money going from the general fund again in this new one. Any of the local governments that want to get their share there must agree to increase government-controlled subsidized housing by 3% per year each year they're in the program. In addition, it creates a 90-day fast-track permit process just for these new government-controlled, taxpayer-subsidized units. So the average Joe who wants to go and get a permit would be pushed to the side, while the 90-day fast-track permit process is used for the government-subsidized units. That's a big problem. One, it provides picking winners and losers, but the average person is losing out. Just today I was reading about like a 12-week delay, 12 weeks, just for somebody to get a window permit, a regular contractor who's used to it. And now we're going to make the system more complicated like that with something like 123, which is a terrible, terrible measure. And I'm just going over the list. There's a variety of problems with the amount of government control that Prop 123, which is, I think, still coming out with a massive it might be at least a couple $1 million. If they haven't already started, I may have missed it. TV campaign about affordable housing and how great it'll be, and how there's firefighters and there's teachers and they don't have units, and we've got to pass this plan. We've got to do it now. There are so many problems. I don't see exactly how this, first of all, where this, just going back to the funding, what you're doing is they're taking money, as I've described it so many times to reporters, and it doesn't get relayed enough, is that we're taking money from, right now, we have TABOR rebates that have this year were the tune of $750. We have future TABOR rebates coming to people that could be, again, forecast change, but could be anywhere from hundreds of dollars down to maybe a couple $100. Prop 123 is going to take a portion of that. In some years, it may end up taking all of the TABOR rebates. But right now, whatever that figure may be, because I think they've got some figure in there, $40 to $80 per person. It could change at any time, but it doesn't matter. That $40 to $80 is still that person's TABOR rebate. The way it's set up now with TABOR, each and every taxpayer benefits. Prop 123 is going to take part of or all of your rebates moving into the future and give it to a very select amount of people so that they can have government-controlled subsidized housing. The controls that are in place should give a lot of concern to people. There is an administrator who can be picked of this whole program. Again, they're determining concessionary loans, so they could be setting interest rates. They're in charge of a government land banking program. They're dishing out money to local participating governments who have to fit those hurdles of increased density, multifamily dense subsidized housing by 3% per year. There's an administrator who's in charge of this, who is supposed to be picked with no less than 72 hours notice to the public, and can have a contract for up to 5 years to administer hundreds of millions of dollars into something I don't think government should be doing, certainly not more of in the first place. Started, looking at, well, what if it's going to, we don't even have a good idea of all the money we're putting into these programs. Another thing Prop 123 does is put money into more homelessness programs. There are recent reports, there was just I hope I have it right, 1.6 billion spent into homelessness programs. I think that's right. Sorry, I've just done so much. There was a 600 million, I know for sure, but I think another one just recently came out through Common Sense Institute. It was either 1.2 billion or 1.6, but we don't even know that that's all of that. Then going to the housing end of what are we doing right now? We have got the state of Colorado that I am just, this one I do want to get correct, so bear with me just 1 second, that we have just been, you'll see it in the blue book, it's page 41. We've already got $200 million going to housing programs. We just put another 1.2 billion, this is page 42 of the blue book. I don't throw a lot of figures out. 1.2 billion from the American Rescue Plan, which is federal money, just went into housing. We haven't even started that yet. And then we've got a knee-jerk reaction like 123, which is going to have all of these additional dollars that used to be our TABOR refunds benefiting people. If it's $750 like this year, that's half of somebody's rent for a month. I mean, these are meaningful numbers. And if we're making a permanent action with 123, giving away TABOR rebates forever, there's no way to even calculate how much that is in value that you're giving away for what is going to be framed in these TV commercials as affordable housing that has to happen now because firefighters and teachers aren't able to get a house. But you're giving away a lot, and you're giving away, if you're not a firefighter or teacher, you're giving away your refund, and you may very well need that. I mean, we've got to cost a dozen eggs at $4 a dozen. Okay, so there's a long other list of problems with 123, but it is one of the greatest concerns that I have on the ballot.
Definitely. 123 is totally nefarious and a real serious problem for anybody who believes in free markets or wants to see free market solutions to the housing crisis here in Colorado. I mean, like you said, this high density subsidized housing is going to actually push out developers out of specific areas so they can't come in and have entrepreneurs create their own programs. We have a government competing against them. Well, who's going to win that fight? We all know where that's going to go. And do we really want to see these high density, buildings all across the state that are totally controlled and completely out of place, possibly out of place with the rest of the community?
Well, two other things. The way I look at it is like in Lakewood, we're kind of landlocked. Or, look at other municipalities. So you're going to infill as much as you can, and then you're going to build up. But at what point in time might it be looking to say, sorry, single family residential is just actually a selfish thing. And we should, we've used the carrot. Now it's time to use the whip. And we see that in other government actions. I don't know where we stop there. And I can't help but mention, and I just really haven't had enough time to do the research on this, but honestly, I do have concerns about our water in government. Not water in government, our water in Colorado. And if what this measure 123 is proposing to do is they want to build like 10,000 units, I think, per year, additional government controlled subsidized units. Well, from building experts I've talked to, right now with the availability of what's out there, and then also because of the COVID economic shutdown by the government, the supply is off, right? We're able to get in about 40 to 45,000 units built a year. So if Prop 123 this government controlled housing is going to take over what's available, both in terms of actual physical real estate, but then available workforce, supply, all these things to get to their goal. That means the government in this action is taking over 25% of the building supply. I did another way to calculate it in my mind. And with the way I did it, I came up with really there's regular private sector, there's the current government sector, subsidized housing, which we already know there's a lot of money going into these programs already, whether it's homelessness, housing, whatever. But you're going to have private sector. I'm trying to get my hands in here. I'm a very handsy person. Anyway, we got the third that is private sector. We've got the third of the government controlled, taxpayer funded stuff going on, housing. And then we have Prop 123, which can't replace any of what's going on now with government stuff. That all has to be new. In that sense, it's a third of the mark, third of what's there. So whether you say a quarter of the market now go into government hands or a third, I don't know how that helps the
Right.
average Joe. I don't know how that helps. And you're taking your TABOR refunds to start it. So that it may sound like an innocent measure, but I see so much harm from it. It's hard to express it.
Double whammy. You lose your tax refund money, your tax rebate money. You have less money for your family, for your housing, yourself, and then you have to compete against when you're looking to buy a new home. Well, prices just went up for a lot of middle class people because now the low income, the subsidized housing has kind of changed the market, changed that market structure now to limit what's available for the middle class, what's available for people who are able to be self-sufficient financially.
Yes. Yeah. I think it says something in itself that both gubernatorial candidates have not endorsed Prop 123. The Joint Budget Committee, you're familiar with the
Mhm.
legislature. During the hearing to set the question for this, the Joint Budget Committee is some members have concerns about 123, and that goes from both aisles. Because if the way this formula for funding it is structured, the proponents are clear, they want the TABOR rebates. But let's say there's no TABOR rebates. We haven't gone over that cap. They haven't chewed that up. Then it just goes into the general fund. Prop 123 says they don't have to fund these programs. Well, then it creates issue. You've created at the local level. Are you going to shift it to where the local has to take care of it? But the JBC, I think it was Senator Zenzinger, said, well, yeah, but there's kind of been a contract then given a handshake with the voters, let's say. That's not her exact words, with them that we're going to fund it. So even Zenzinger, I believe, had some concerns because, well, what about education or this or what might be eventually a higher priority? You've now said we have to put it into housing and reduce the flexibility of the Joint Budget Committee. So I think that speaks something that some nonprofits are in favor of this thing, but looking at the actual governments, from both sides, there's issues.
Hmm. Well, that is some sense of hope then for me at least that there's some recognition even on the Democratic side that there's a problem with this and people who might normally support some sort of government paid for housing see some problems and some issues with that. I think that does speak well.
Yeah. So I'm happy to leave you with that. And remember, a couple things I do want to mention is just for website. If people want to know more about Prop 123, I did set up a website. I'm also although I'm a member board director for TABOR Foundation, I'm also the registered agent for No on Prop 123. And if you go to noprop123.com, there are more articles, a little more of some of that information that I tossed out that is maybe a little easier to review the second time. So again, that's noprop123.com.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, I really appreciate you, Natalie. Really appreciate all your hard work and everything you've done. Is there anything else you want to talk about? Did you want to talk about Proposition GG at all briefly?
Yeah.
Natalie, what can you tell us about Proposition GG that's on this year's ballot?
Yeah. So I listened to a lot of YouTube radio or music. And Proposition GG, the proponents like to tell you there's no ballot transparency. And we need to add this tax table onto the ballot. It's a great idea. They just keep running the ads over and over and over. The fact is, what GG boils down to is it's a bad idea. First of all, this is one of the ones that got on the ballot because legislators, the politicians, put it on the ballot. So I've got it in my voter guide, which you can find at ballot2022.com. And actually, somebody else gave me the great way to sum this up. This is Proposition GG was written by politicians for politicians. What it's trying to do is say, for folks like the Independence Institute, which has now for some, at least a few, I think this is third one now, put a ballot issue on to give a moderate tax cut to the citizens. It doesn't have enough transparency how that'll benefit you or not. So what they want to do with Proposition GG is insert a 8-level taxpayer table onto our ballot, which I think it'll clutter it up, so people are more aware of how a tax cut will in some way be insignificant or harm them. That is the goal of what these proponents want to do, meaning the politicians who put it on the ballot. The irony is they don't want to apply the same thing to themselves. So on this year, there's Proposition FF, which is, the easy way to remember that one is free food. So FF is the one that is going to penalize anybody earning $300,000 or more, where they'll cap their deductions. They're going to be less likely to give charitable contributions. That amendment proposes to penalize people for being productive. That issue is going to raise taxes, essentially. So with GG, it's saying you don't have to insert a tax table, though, for something like that, one that's a tax increase. The only time this tax table will be inserted on the ballot is if it's a citizen-initiated tax cut measure. So I go back to GG is written by politicians for politicians. If they really wanted ballot transparency, like their ads all over YouTube or wherever else they're advertising, because they've got actually a pretty decent chunk of money, it's in a good example of the government wants to set some rules for citizens who want liberty and to keep more taxes in their pocket, but government doesn't have to follow by the same rules. And to start with, this tax table they want to put on the ballot, it's already inside of this blue book that we all get in the mail, this thick thing that has all this information. So why single out citizen-initiated measures like this year's Proposition 121, which has given us tax relief? Why single out the citizens measure and insert something to clutter up the ballot? But the government doesn't have to follow those same things and show you how that tax hike is going to affect you on the ballot. GG is a bad idea, stupid idea. The politicians just love to try and harm us in any way that they can.
Well, thank you very much for that clarification. It's kind of a nuance initiative on there, and so it's really good to see what's actually going on with it and the total hypocrisy of these politicians who want to stop citizens from keeping their own money, but of course don't want to do anything to impede their ability to steal more of our money at the same time. So absolutely outrageous. I really hope GG loses. That's a really tough one, I think, for a lot of people who are unaware of the details in terms of what it actually implies.
Yeah. They've been very pretty clear. If you're one of the political wonks, they've been pretty clear. They don't like John Caldera's Independence Institute tax cuts. They don't like other citizen tax cuts. So no on GG. Thanks for letting me talk about that one. It's one that's unfortunately flying under the radar and will probably pass.
Yeah, the red flag for me was looking who got it on the ballot, seeing the legislators at the state capitol and just looking at that list. And there's not a single one of them who doesn't love increasing taxes. So for me, I said, okay, that's the first red flag. What are they trying to accomplish here? They're not trying to create more transparency to inform the voters. They're trying to game the system, rig the ballot to provide their agenda success.
Yeah, and looking at what will trigger it, I think there's some great definitions on even what they'll consider a tax cut and how, and ultimately, as decided to put it, it opens up the door for ballot mischief. And for those who have concerns about, and I'm not going to speak to myself for this one, but concerns about processing ballots themselves, just speaking it from an administrative end and the
Um,
scanning process and all of that, to insert something else onto the ballot, I don't think it's the best thing to be doing with ballots in the first place, especially when it's available in the blue book anywhere
right,
for all of them, just right now,
right.
the way it is.
And that's why we have the blue book. It's because you can't cram the ballot with 200 pages of arguments, nuanced information, and details. It just doesn't. That's not what the ballot's for.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Well,
well,
perfect, Natalie. Well, appreciate you very much. Appreciate all your hard work and your activism. We got to continue this conversation going forward. Please let me know anything I can do to help you on your mission. And thank you. Just thank you very much for taking time. I know you're busy right now with the election coming up, and really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And I'm going to work on getting this information out as soon as we can to as many people as possible.
well, thank you very much. I'm really glad to speak to your audience about freedom in Colorado. We need more of it.
Well, thank you, Natalie. Take care.
Okay, good day.